Good afternoon, bookworms and flyleafs. Welcome to this Friday's episode of Author Reads here on Fae Productions. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And before we jump into the main meat of the show, if you will, please go over there, rush over there, and like, subscribe. And today we're going to modify the bell, which I think you will soon come to understand why we've chosen that particular word. We do something different to our bell every show. So today we're going to modify the bell if you want to get notifications of our future shows. And then also, I would like to give a shout out to today's show sponsor, which is one of this year's Fairy Blossom Festival virtual fairy market vendors, Foxes and Ravens, and they are an enchanting female-owned business for fantasy and fairy tale leather creations. They specialize in custom tooling and offer a variety of leather accessories for the fair and, of course, everyday life in a variety of themes. They've created a universe that helps adventurers navigate their shop, and this is actually pretty cool. It is a land called the Guarded Realms, and it is so called because it is guarded by the great fox and raven spirits. This is, as I'm presuming, their website. With the within the realms, there are the Elder Grove, which is elvish. There is the Witch's Cottage for magical-y things. There is Fairy Hollow, which is fairy stuff, and the Shiredom for the hobbits, and the Halls of Drakkar for Viking items. And the great twin cities of Foxford and Corvix, known for their taverns and libraries. They also offer gear for wanderers and adventurers and a range of items to fit any fantasy character that you may have, with several options for customization. Every piece is lovingly crafted, with several crafted by Nora, who is the proprietress of the website, and she is actually from Canada, but does ship worldwide. So please go check her out, and of course all of her information for her store is going there in the ticker. It is also in the low bar on Facebook and YouTube, not on Twitch because Twitch doesn't allow that, but you guys get it. So please go check out her stuff. I'm really excited actually to have her in our virtual fairy market this year for Fairy Blossom Festival. Looking forward to that. And so I think with all of that said, we just get to jump right into the show today. I don't have a lot of announcements or anything. So welcome, please, Jp James Chandler, to the show.
Hello, everybody.
It is a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks.
Yeah, how's your Friday going?
It's been going pretty well, actually. I have a real job that I have to do during the day, and so I got to do that this morning. But now I'm here, and this is much better.
Yes, so something that you actually like. Well, if you will, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you write. Let's hear.
So my name is James Chandler. I use JP because it looks good on a book cover. Everyone calls me Jim or James. I live in Sonoma, California, in the heart of the wine country.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been here for about 30 years. I love the area. It's a beautiful 80-degree day for all of those who are wondering. Nice, dry climate.
I am jealous.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. And I've been writing since I was 14 years old. And like many writers, I started by being fascinated as a reader and just deciding that I could write similar stories. So I've been putting little pieces of stories and such together for a long time, practicing the art. I did go to college for an English degree, and now I'm just in the past couple of years decided to get serious about writing and actually make it a profession if I can get there. So.
So you've been writing for most of your life since your teenage years. What got you into writing so early?
Honestly, it was reading a lot of books, and most of the classic epic fantasies, Lord of the Rings, etc. And wanting a book that ended the way I wanted it, and that where I felt I could make the characters do what I wanted versus what the author was having them do. It was literally that simple, just really wanting to put my imagination on paper and see if I can get other people to participate.
As they say, write what you want to read.
Exactly. So I read a whole lot of epic fantasy with some side ventures into science fiction. I always liked science fiction, but the epic fantasy were always my go-to that I looked for. And I remember when I graduated high school, my big gift was a whole bunch of books. So I ended up with like 20 little paperbacks of various books that I got.
Do you know how many books you own?
Unfortunately, I had to get rid of a bunch of them through some moves, but yeah, I know. Well, they were all paperbacks, so it wasn't a tragedy, but it was probably it's probably about 500. I have like 350 or something just on my Kindle, and I don't have any I don't have any duplicates. So as far as I don't have hard copies of the books, I have electronic copies of. So yeah, I've been collecting for a long time, and one of these days I'll have a place big enough to just keep the hard copies.
Yes, that is like one of those vast libraries that you see in,
Yep.
pictures and memes and whatnot. So we always joke about speaking of paperbacks, you're like, well, it's not that big of a loss. And Ion the Leprechaun and I always would joke about how in like a terrible dystopian world, the only libraries that are left to exist would be like the paperback section at the secondhand store, which is filled with nothing but like terrible romance novels.
Oh yeah. My mother was a huge romance novel fan, and we had boxes and boxes of these Barbara Cartland books that we ended up piling up for years. Man, that's a memory.
Yeah, that and Reader's Digest condensed versions.
Yeah, I actually read a few of those abridged versions of stories. It was pretty interesting.
I used to read those when I was a youngling because that was what my grandparents loved to read, and so
sometimes when you need to read something, you read anything you can find.
Yes, that's actually how I discovered H.P. Lovecraft. I was in a house and there was literally nothing for me to do. And I just pulled a book off a shelf and started reading, and then that was the end. The rest is history, as they say there. So, so I'm really excited actually. So you write in some of my favorite genres like horror and post-apoc and whatnot. I really love those genres of work, and I'm curious to hear about one, what you have written, and two, what you're going to be reading to us from today.
Okay, so what I have written is my first professional sale was a short story in the Four Horsemen universe. The book is called Tales from the Lion's Den, and the story is called Lucky. I got some pretty good responses, and that was part of what encouraged me to keep going. I love the 4HU, and it's a lot of fun to write in. I may eventually do a novel there, but I'm not sure. I really enjoy writing in this Fallen World series, which was started by Chris Woods and Chris Kennedy. And so my first novel is They Call Me Princess, and it takes place in this Fallen World, which is a shared setting. There are, I think, 14 books in the series now. You don't need to read all the books to read my novel. It's a great entry into the world, and I've really been pleased with the response to it. It is coming out in audiobook next week, so if you prefer audiobooks or like them at all, check that out. The narration, I've heard it. The narration is amazing. They actually brought in some outside talent to give a female voice to the narration, and it came out just really, really good. I was really pleased with it. And my most recent publication is a short story in Songs of Valor, which was an anthology out of the Fantasy Convention in North Carolina. And I got in by way of a contest. I submitted my short story, and it got published, and it actually won top honors at Fantasy. So that's the story I'm going to be reading today.
That is awesome. We get to hear an award-winning story. I love it. And congratulations on that, by the way. Yeah, so I guess I find the genetic modification kind of in line with the current atmosphere that is all around us, right? Everybody getting these COVID shots and being all worried that, the nanos are in us now.
You've got the chip. Yeah, I've got the Johnson & Johnson chip myself. So, and
yes, that's what I'm. So I'm kind of curious if it's not too much of a spoiler, because I don't want to do that, but I super want to know how the people get genetically modified in your book, They Call Me Princess, since you're not reading from that one today.
Right. Okay. Well, it's kind of fun because the way I describe the book is a cross between Mad Max and Blade Runner.
Oh, nice.
Sort of like what happens if you had Blade Runner and then you had an apocalypse after that. And the way, different characters are, there's a program from the corporations that basically run the world. Two of them started engaging in these genetic modifications, and there's a whole history behind that and how it happened and different things that were done. And that's kind of fun to explore. My characters in the book, one is an obsidian agent, and the agent is these super soldiers and operatives that have genetic modifications to make them super strong and fast. There's a little more explanation to that. So one of them is an agent. The other two are little children at the beginning of the book, and their father sort of sees that things are going south in the world, and decides that he's going to genetically modify his kids to give them a chance to survive, to give them a better chance to survive. It's not as altruistic as it sounds, but it's successful, and the kids are modified, and they grow up with these modifications. However, the main character doesn't know about them. So the story is basically about her and how she discovers that she's got these modifications, and then figuring out how she's going to fit in the world. As basically this super soldier character, and that's where the story goes from there, and it's pretty fun. So no spoilers. That's basically all in the blurb. So,
do you find it particularly difficult to write for a female character as a male author?
It was it wasn't. I basically grew up with two sisters, and my mom is the biggest influences in my life. I've had a lot of female friends over the years. In fact, most of my friends are women. And so I've been able to observe how they see things and hear what they say to each other and that kind of thing my whole life. And so when I actually dove into it, it was a little bit easier than I thought. I'm not saying it wasn't a challenge, but because it was. My favorite compliment on the book so far is somebody who literally asked, "Is Jp Chandler a woman?" So, so I was able to use that, and it was also,
that's good.
Frankly, I listened to the advice of a lot of female writers and female fans who point out things that they don't like about men writing women. And I sort of had this checklist in my head of things to avoid, and I think I did a pretty good job of it. So.
I'm curious. Well, and I kind of asked that because I know that is definitely a thing that is sort of in the author sphere out there, is writing for and without conferring, right, with anybody that's of that thing, right? Yeah. And I'm curious, what do you think? What do you think is the top thing that you try to avoid when doing that?
Body references. Talking about what she looks like all the time. I try to give a pretty good indication of her size and shape, but I also like to leave a lot of that to the imagination of the reader. But I also don't focus in on it. I don't make a big deal out of what size her breasts are, for example, or things like that, which you do see a lot from male writers. And I don't think it's very necessary, quite frankly. I did cheat a little bit in that my wife is my first reader, so and she didn't bring up anything that bothered her, so that was helpful.
That's also, though, she kind of has personal insight into you, right? She can probably read a lot of that and know what your internal intentions are, because
Exactly.
she just knows you, right? So
That's true. That's true.
okay, so the premise or the setting for today's story is.
Okay, so the premise for today's story is it was written for a contest, and the subject of the contest was the unlikely or unexpected hero, basically. How do you and so there's a variety of stories in there. So it was the unlikely or reluctant hero. How people. These are generally, it's called Songs of Valor, so you're looking for a story about valor and valorous deeds and things like that. And it's how different characters that you don't expect to be valorous or whatever, courageous, step up and end up taking that role. And it's a great collection of stories. I highly recommend it. I like all of the stories. There are a couple that are my favorites, but I recommend all of them. They're all great reads. And this one takes place in a as yet undefined fantasy world that is that might grow into something more down the road. At the moment, it's a standalone story that just tells this event in this person's life after a long history of basically well, it's in the story, so I don't want to give it away.
Okay, that sounds awesome, and I'm ready to hear from today's reading. If you are prepared to read, I see you have your drink there ready to go, so that's good.
There you go.
All right. So for everybody watching at home, I'm about to turn the entire screen over to James. I will be in the background on mute and in the comments section with you guys so we can chat back and forth. We can take questions. And when he is done reading, then we'll go ahead and take your questions and he can answer them. And then, of course, at the end of the show, we'll collect your names up and do a drawing for a free book. So with that said, I am putting myself on mute and giving you the whole screen.
Well, I apologize for having to see my face so large, but The Hill to Die On by Jp Chandler. Vriza stopped. His legs burned from climbing the hill and sweat stung his eyes. Dust filled his nose and coated his skin. The weight of his armor and pack pulled at him. He glanced back and noted he was only a third of the way up the slope. The ground was even, but the soil, dry, granular, and mixed with grass that had been pounded to chaff, shifted until his weight settled, forcing him to make every step careful and deliberate. The column of refugees passed him, crossing the face of the hill to make the climb half as steep and twice as long. They trudged along about 10 abreast. The head of the line was over the crest of the hill. Some moved in groups for comfort, but many moved alone, barely watching the ground before their feet. The clouds of dust could not hide the smell of sweat and worse. He walked several paces away from the passing throng and turned around. The slope stretched for miles to the north and south, remarkably straight and regular as if engineered by the hand of a god. To the west, a similar hill faced them across 200 paces of mostly flat ground, rising with a more gradual incline. The sunken middle of the flat ground probably filled with water in winter, but it lay dry this late in the summer. A thick carpet of heavy grass covered the ground, peppered with shrubs and white-barked trees, except for a thick stand of trees just south of him, straddling the stream bed. He imagined it appeared much prettier in spring when the grass would be green. Vriza dropped his spear and watched it bounce in the dirt. He removed his pack, shield, and helmet and laid them upslope of where he stood. He unbelted his short sword, and it joined the rest. He sat down facing west, drew his knees up slightly and braced his weight, and leaned against his pile of gear, using his stiff cuirass for support. Taking a break, Vriza looked up to find a young man behind the raspy voice. Tall and broad-shouldered, his skin appeared barely adequate to cover his bony frame. He held a wooden shield in one hand and a battered spear in the other. A thick leather apron, split at the legs, the kind a blacksmith might wear, served as his only armor. He looked at Vriza from under a mass of dark curls. "This seems a nice place to die," Vriza replied. The boy looked around for several seconds. The throng of refugees moved in eerie silence, their shuffling feet the only noise of their passing. He shrugged and removed his pack, then took a seat on Vriza's left. "It is a lovely valley," the young man agreed. He leaned his head back and sighed in relief. They sat in silence. Another man stopped nearby. His gray stubble showed him to be close to Vriza's age, and he wore his pack over thick shoulders with surprising ease. He looked around briefly with a scowl before taking a seat on the other side of Vriza. "How long do you think until the horde gets here?" the blacksmith asked. "Tonight, maybe tomorrow. No later," the man to Vriza's right said. Vriza noticed heads turning toward them as their voices carried across the silent hillside. Several paces down the hill, a man stepped out of the line and looked at them before heading in their direction. Vriza marked him as a soldier by the weapons he carried. "How far will they chase us?" the young man asked. "I thought they would have stopped before now." "The Mage King is never satisfied," a new voice offered as another man took a seat behind them. "He will not stop." The group fell silent, and they watched the other refugees flow by. A few more then peeled off from the column and joined them. "Hard to imagine," somebody said. "We should be preparing for our harvest festival soon, maybe next year." "I'll be a grandfather before the end of the summer," another said. "My family owned a wine shop." Vriza listened to them with half his attention. They told of their homes, their local traditions, and their future plans. Some longed for what was lost, others looked to a future without the Black Horde or the Mage King. There would be no festivals in the village where Vriza was born. No children or grandchildren awaited him. "This is a good spear," the blacksmith said. He examined it closely with his eyes and hands. "The shaft is strong, but the head is little more than scrap." "Keep it," Vriza grunted. "I won't need it anymore." "I've never seen this type of wood before." "The Ahiri call it wood of the heart," Vriza answered. "Ahiri hardwood?" another man said from behind the smith. A hush fell among the men nearby. Over his shoulder, Vriza nodded to a balding man stretching his thin neck to see past the smith. His eyes sparkled with intellectual avarice. Vriza knew the type, a scholar. Mostly useless and best kept from underfoot. "I've heard stories about heartwood," another man said. "Yes," enthused the scholar. "Ahiri heartwood is rumored to be magical. Weapons made of it are supposed to reflect the strength of the heart of the wielder and grow stronger with each new owner." A murmur rippled through the gathering. "I don't know about stories," Vriza said with a chuckle. "I know it'll leave a good knot on your head." Some of the other men chuckled with him. "I can replace the blade," the young man said, lost in his concentration. "I'm a blacksmith. I brought extras in case mine broke. I have one left." Vriza looked at him skeptically and shrugged. The smith opened his pack and dug down to the bottom. With an effort to wiggle something past all the supplies, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in thick leather. From it, he pulled a spearhead half a pace long. Vriza gaped at the shiny metal. The shiny steel, sleek and refined in its smooth lines and precise symmetry. Laying the spearheads aside, he continued to reveal a head for a battle axe. A perfectly uniform curved blade formed one side while the other boasted a thick spike with a slight arc. The men around them leaned forward for a closer look, making noises of appreciation. "This is my masterpiece," the blacksmith said, smiling proudly. He handed it to the man to his left, who looked it over in appreciation before passing it on. "The guild approved my advancement when they saw it. I was planning to make something delicate, but we learned the horde was approaching. A weapon seemed more appropriate." He pulled out a second pack and unrolled it to reveal a collection of tools. The smith detached the old spearhead and began shaping the haft to fit the socket of the new blade with practiced certainty. Remarks of appreciation followed the axe head as it was passed through the group. When it made its way around, the man to Vriza's right nudged his shoulder and handed it to him. "This is some of the finest steel I've ever seen," Vriza said, genuinely impressed. Setting the socket for the haft on 2 fingers, the blade and spike balanced each other exactly. "I come from Tanara. Fine steel is our specialty, the smith said without slowing his work. Tanara does make fine steel, someone said. You'll be a great master, another said. It took longer than I hoped to get it right. The smith tested the fit of the spearhead as he spoke. I couldn't decide on the haft I wanted, and then the horde attacked before I could mount it. That was last summer. Some of that heartwood would make a nice handle, the skinny scholar said brightly. Grunts of agreement passed through the group. Holding the axe head stirred a sharp memory in Vriza. He twisted around and pulled his pack in front of him. After some rummaging, he extracted a section of wood similar to the shaft of the spear, but only the length from his elbow to the tip of his longest finger. One end sheared off cleanly. He handed it to the smith along with the axe head. This will be perfect, the young smith breathed reverently. It's only a scrap, Vriza said. A memory of the last stupid act of sacrifice. You fought with the Ahiri, the scholar asked. Returning the man's gaze, Vriza noticed others watching, waiting for his answer. I fought with them, he said quietly, reluctantly. He watched the other hilltop where refugees continued to arrive. The men around him fell quiet. Only the smith's tools scraping on wood and the incessant shuffling of feet in the dirt disturbed the hot afternoon. I thought the Ahiri were destroyed years ago, the scholar said. To the last, Vriza confirmed. He continued as if speaking to himself. Their skin was so dark I feared they were creatures of the Mage King when we first met them. They believed battle was a game and death just the beginning of a new life. They relished the challenge of facing the horde. It took the jaws of an Aranath to snap that spear. An Aramath, someone said. You fought one of the great boars? Did you kill it? Another voice asked. And Ahiri killed it, Vriza answered. He shoved the spear down the monster's throat, but the damage was done. The boar broke our lines. None of the Ahiri escaped in the retreat. Always the beasts, a quiet voice said. Where does he even find them all? Another asked. How does he control them? Yet another said. I heard he summoned a dragon when he destroyed the city of Leithelin. That he did, Vriza whispered. Watching the endless train of refugees cresting the hill to the west, Vriza noticed the sun was descending toward the horizon. The group around him discussed the monsters. The Mage King always started with monsters. For the fear. Beasts of magic and legend, some powerful enough to defeat an army alone. Then his mages attacked with foul spells that would kill or blind or disarm. Finally, if any defenders were still standing, the black-armored soldiers and cavalry would finish the job. And you, the blacksmith nudged Vriza, ending his reverie. What do you think about the monsters? You must have faced many of them. The smith tested the fit of the spearhead to the shaft, smiling at the result. The first monster I remember was the Amarok, Vriza said quietly. The voices around him hushed. Like a wolf, but taller than any horse, and wider than a bear. It had poisonous claws and fangs that dripped with acid. It came in the night and started pulling people from their homes. I was just short of 17. We swarmed the beast, but it killed half the village. I put a knife in its eye. Then came the black mist, killing any it touched, and then the hooves of the cavalry. The few of us left ran to the next town. The town surrendered instead of fighting, so I ran to the next town, and the next. That was 25 years ago, Vriza murmured. He fell silent. Not far from the gathering, dirty, tired faces watched him intently as refugees continued past, plodding forward, bent under the weight of bundles and packs. Their clothes or the color of their skin, or sometimes the shape of a nose, marked them from coming from a dozen lands. Peasants and princes were indistinguishable from tradesmen and merchants. Only the soldiers were easy to identify, carrying little more than armor and weapons. He wished them speed with faint hope. He knew what waited. How many wars have you fought? A deep, sonorous voice asked from behind him. Just one, Vriza said. You've been fighting the Mage King that long? The blacksmith asked, his eyes wide and hands frozen over his work. I've lost to the Mage King that long, Vriza replied. He wasn't called the Mage King then. He continued, as if speaking to himself. Those near strained to hear. We called him the Black Mage. When he defeated my homeland, he called himself king. I ran away with those who survived. At every town and fortress we lent our strength, but it was never enough. We sent for aid, but most only recognized the danger when it was fast upon them, usually when we arrived at their gates, begging for entry. His ranks grew as he forced the defeated to join him. I have always wondered if I would eventually wear that black armor. Maybe I'll find out this time. The setting sun silhouetted a group of figures cresting the peak of the western hill. Guarded by a squad of cavalry, several men bore a litter, while one followed behind holding a standard. With the sun behind it, Riza could not identify the squad. Nobody else followed. Forming a symbolic rear guard, they moved at a measured, stately pace. Riza shook his head in awe at the sight. Those men had waited behind the slowest and weakest of the refugees to bring up their master and maintain their dignity. Even with death following, they had chosen to give courage to others rather than lead the retreat. By the time the group of soldiers reached the bottom of the hill, a light mist began to form along the path of the occasional creek. The mist was growing rapidly into a fog, which appeared to glow from within in the silvery light of all three moons rising close together. Riza stood and faced the rear guard as the soldiers approached, still maintaining their careful pace. He straightened his posture and saluted. The men around him stood and followed his example. From his limited vantage, he could see several different salutes, each person following the tradition of his home. The lead cavalry officer barked a command, bringing the squad to a halt. The litter bearers and standard bearer also stopped. At another command, the cavalry saluted together. At a third command, the squad continued. The lead officer caught Vriza's eye and nodded. Vriza sat and watched the other hill. How much longer? How far back were the Black Horde and the Mage King? You know where we are, don't you? The excited voice of the little scholar over his left shoulder woke Riza. He had intended to stay awake, but his soldier's instincts had taken over. Does it matter? Somebody asked. It might, the scholar said. The moons above were brighter than Riza had ever seen, and they were almost lined up across the sky, following the same line as the valley. Low fog covered the floor of the valley, but only reached a short way up the slope. Despite the light, the facing hill stood cloaked in shadow, and Riza could feel malevolence emanating from across the wall of mist. The horde had arrived. He had seen the trick before, but it felt obvious and less intimidating under the light of all three moons. I don't think any of us come from this place, another voice said. Me neither, but I know this place, the scholar said reverently. This is the Valley of Athelas. According to legend, the god of war defeated Menrikelinar right here. A god with a name that long deserved to be defeated, Riza quipped. Several people chuckled in response. He was cast down to become the god of death. Your Athelas has a good eye for terrain, Riza noted. Well, she's not mine. Athelas is a local deity. There's a shrine to her on top of the hill, the scholar said, almost smiling, but the stories have traveled. What gods do you believe in? The smith asked Riza and nudged with a nudge of his elbow. All of them, Riza answered, and none. The only thing I ever asked of the gods is a quick death. None have obliged. Maybe we could call upon the gods, the scholar exhorted. This is a special place, historic. The link to the gods must be strong here. Contempt clouded Riza's scowl. Then he turned to meet the scholar's sincere eyes. What did I say? The scholar asked. Don't you think that's been tried? Don't you think these men around you, those who believe in gods, have already prayed for victory? Don't you think the people of all the kingdoms destroyed or conquered by the Mage King, or the Black Mage, or whatever he prefers to call himself, all prayed to their gods for victory? Riza didn't hold back his growing anger as he continued. They prayed. I watched them. They prayed. They made sacrifices. They did everything they thought their gods wanted, and still they died. I don't want anything to do with any god that waits to hear me pray while ignoring the prayers of others. I've been fighting the Horde my entire life. If the gods wanted to stop the Mage King, they had many chances. If the gods cared, the Ahiri would stand beside us. If they cared, they would never have waited this long to stop such horrors. Frieza spat in the dirt. We can still hope, the scholar countered, breathing heavily. No, my friend, Frieza stated. If the gods exist, and if they care, they're not listening to the likes of you and me. They're listening to him and his horde. What do gods care about the lives of mortals? The man with the deep voice asked from behind Frieza. Gods allow the deaths of mortals. Gods allowing the deaths of mortals can prove little about the gods, the quiet man to Frieza's right concluded. I think the most religions teach that we mortals will achieve our greatest existence after death. If there's any truth there, then death itself is not evil. That would make your Ahiri friends right. From the view of a god, death is just another trial, or maybe the end of them. Then the Black Horde is doing the work of the gods, Frieza concluded. The hill fell silent. This is a terrible way to prepare for battle, someone said. Preparing for battle should involve lots of drink. And women. You sound like a dwarf. Well, the dwarves knew the proper way to prepare for battle. A chuckle passed among the group. I can't do that. It's suicide. Sorry. You can't do that. It's suicide. I thought dwarves condemned suicide, snapped Frieza. We do, but we also love a noble sacrifice, Hrothgar countered. You'll need to write a song about us. I don't want to write a song about you. I want to fight next to you like we have for months. And I don't write songs. It was your idea, lad. I was drunk. It's still a good idea. Digging yourselves into holes so you can pop up behind them just to attack the archers and engineers is not a good idea. It's suicide, Frieza repeated. Even if you succeed, you'll never get back to the army. There aren't enough of you to manage a retreat if the horde turns on you. Stop, Frieza, Hrothgar said firmly. He placed his powerful hand on the soldier's upper arm, forcing Frieza to meet his ancient brown eyes. It's decided. I know the risks. It's worth taking. Replacing archers and engineers can take years, and those daft mages will never see it coming. This isn't the kind of fight you hope to live through. You just hope the people you love live through it for you. Frieza blinked in the bright light of the three moons as a nudge from the smith. He had drifted to sleep again. He wiped dust from his eye, ignoring the moisture with it. Something's happening, the smith said, leaning toward Frieza. It looks like the horde doesn't plan to wait for morning. I thought it was morning, Frieza said. It's barely midnight, someone answered. Looking up, Frieza confirmed the moons had all lined up across the exact center of the sky, closer than normal, looking directly at the valley floor. Frieza shook his head to dispel the reverie and the last wisps of his memories of the dwarves and their sacrifice. He had only slept a couple of hours, but felt refreshed. Across the valley, the Mage King's magic no longer concealed the Black Horde. The soldiers in black armor covered the hill from foot to crown, lined up in strict ranks and blocks. Heavy cavalry on matching black horses waited at the top of the hill. Behind the black-clad army, another army waited, smaller and less uniform in its equipment, but still formidable. It would serve as a reserve and clean up the mess after the slaughter. Its mere presence proscribed hope. They look like they're preparing for battle, Frieza remarked. What's the point? There's nothing here to attack. Look around, the smith said with a smirk. Frieza stood and his mouth fell open in shock. To either side of him, men sat in rows along the slope as far as he could see. Their ranks, sloppy but discernible, climbed all the way to the crest of the hill, which stood even higher than the hill occupied by the horde. In their midst stood banners from a dozen or more nations and hundreds of others. Men of all ages had joined, many too old or too young to face battle. Roughly a third of those in the ranks were women. Armed with anything that could be used as a weapon, they watched the horde grimly. What are they doing? Frieza asked. They should keep running. They'll be killed. They decided they were finished running, the smith said, just like you did. I stopped to surrender, to let them kill me if they want. Frieza's shoulders felt heavy. What had he done? Why didn't they run? It's time, the quiet man said, standing. He pointed to the fog now obscuring the valley floor with his spear before setting about, tightening his armor and hefting his weapon and shield. The moons seemed to hold their place above the valley, A gentle breeze at Vriza's back tickled his hair. I don't believe I have another battle in me, Vriza told the smith. His shoulders drooped deeper. Nonsense, the scholar said, rising as well. This is your chance to challenge the gods and see if they truly are on the side of the Black Horde. Stand against them. Let them smell your contempt. Vriza smirked at imagining himself making a vulgar gesture towards the heavens. The smith held out Vriza's spear to him, as well as the newly finished axe. Those are yours, Vriza said. You should have good weapons for your last stand, the smith countered. My spear is still good, and I've never fought with an axe. My last battle. Well, you are right in front, the man with the deep voice quipped. You'll have a short one. Vriza smiled and a bright chuckle passed among the men around him. You won't be far behind, Vriza said, grinning. Truth, the man said, and laughter rolled through the nearby ranks. One more, the smith held out the weapons again. Vriza took the spear with its new blade. He straightened his shoulders and planted the butt of the spear firmly in the dirt, feeling the thump through his boots. Taking the salute as a signal, the men around him stood as one and began preparing their weapons and armor. Vriza took the axe and slid the handle through his belt at the small of his back. He lifted the short sword out of the dirt and handed it to the smith, then replaced his helmet. Around him, voices grew nervous as every soldier helped his neighbors check their armor. They exchanged greetings, jibes, and a few oaths of brotherhood. Across the valley, the horde stirred. Something moved in the fog. Vriza's lip curled in a sneer. Be merry, my brothers, he said over his shoulders, loud enough for his voice to carry for several rows. There is no point in dying sad. He knelt on one knee, as he had so many times before, and planted his rectangular shield firmly in front of him. He held his spear upright. He turned his head to meet the eyes of the scholar. This night we are soldiers all. The gods of death and war demand our blood. They are not worthy. But if there is a God of soldiers, let our spears be our oath and our shields be our prayer. A chorus of rough grunts responded. The quiet man to his right set his shield so the edge braced Vriza's. They did not meet up as well as Vriza would have liked, but it would serve. On his other side, the blacksmith did likewise. All along the front line, soldiers prepared to form a shield wall. He watched the fog intently. The Mage King would attack first with a monster to break their lines and sow chaos, as he always did. A shadow darkened a portion of the mist, growing steadily until a snout of a great wolf poked through. Another Amarok. It stalked out of the mist and began to climb the hill. Its head swayed back and forth, searching the lines for a likely section to target. Moonlight sparkled off silver strands amidst the wiry fur, shifting as the beast moved. Its massive head swayed to and fro. Moonlight glinted off the beast's left eye. This was the very same beast who had slaughtered his family and his friends and family. Looking closer, he saw the muzzle was gray, and his joints protruded sharply. The creature was still powerful, but much reduced by age. It no longer held quite the awe he remembered. Fair enough, Vriza was no longer young and strong either. An arrow stabbed the ground next to the beast's feet. At least the refugees had archers. It charged off, aiming toward a different section of the front line. Arrow struck the ground behind the wolf, driving it faster. I'm here, Vriza cried, standing from the wall. Come get me, you sack of bones. Vriza stepped back into the wall in a smooth motion. He expected his brothers would be angry at the display, but they grunted their approval as the beast turned quickly to angle its charge toward them. He poked his head above the shield to see. Come on then, Vriza yelled. His voice echoed through the valley. Finish it. The Amarok skidded to a stop in the sandy dirt 30 yards from the line. Its one good eye wide and red. Acid dripped from its jagged fangs to smolder in the dirt as it growled its hatred at the old soldier. Ah, you remember me. Come on and let me send you to heal for the gods. The beast shook as it braced itself to charge. A whisper through the air ended with a quiet thump as an arrow struck its ribs. The Amarok howled in pain and started its charge, but it had paused too long. Dozens of arrows slammed home. All the archers in range had seen the first shot and joined in. Many of the arrows bounced off the evil hide or snapped on impact, but most did not, though. The beast fell silent and slumped to the ground. The valley waited, silent as death. Was it really dead, or was this a trick of the Mage King? Riza stepped out of the wall once more and approached the carcass, his shield and spear held ready. The breeze carried away the stench. The Amarok lay quite dead, nothing but carrion. Blood oozed into the soil and down the slope. Careful to avoid the acid pooling by the maw, Riza leaned over and pulled his knife from the creature's eye. He struggled for a few seconds before it came free. The deer antler handle had broken off, revealing most of the tang. He knew the men of the line watched him closely, so he wiped the blade against the beast's fur with exaggerated motions. He then turned to face the refugees and held the knife high with a broad grin. The hillside erupted in cheers. Riza slogged back to his place in the shield wall. "Think you can fix it?" Riza asked the smith. "Maybe," the smith replied, "but I don't think I'd want to." Whispers traveled through the ranks formed by the refugees, people hushing each other. As the hill quieted, Riza could hear voices, quiet in the distance. There, from beyond the mist, he heard the chanting. He knelt again behind his shield. "The mages are conjuring an attack with their magic," he said. The men around him agreed and spread the news. "I hate these. They're always the worst part." The mist cloaking the bottom of the valley began to darken in a spot almost exactly opposite Riza. The darkness spread slowly across the valley, then grew even darker. "I've seen this before too," Riza said, stunned. "This can't be real. They can't really mean to try this here. The mist will kill everything it touches." "Well, I hope it's quick," the scholar said behind him, affecting a brave tone. "Or should we run?" "Are you as crazy as they are?" Riza looked at the man and shook his head. "The breeze is going the wrong way." Murmurs of understanding passed among the ranks. "I hadn't noticed," the scholar admitted. "Neither did they, it seems," Riza replied. "This should be interesting." He set his shield to the side and sat to watch. The chanting grew louder and angrier, until the mages screamed a crescendo into the night. The mist had become almost pure black, swallowing the light of the moons wherever they touched. At the last command from the mages, the blackened fog rose from the ground, ghostly and unnatural. When the fog reached the height of 2 men from the valley floor, a shouted order echoed across the valley. Riza shook his head. The fog resembled a long bolt of black cloth floating in the air. It settled and appeared to relax when the last command sounded. No longer held in place by their magic, the breeze took control. The deadly mist drifted away from the refugees and toward the black horde. Panicked screams rang out. Mages yelled incantations or fled the approaching abomination. Whips cracked to keep the armored soldiers in place. They fell where they stood. It didn't last long. The mist simply emptied itself of the black that had infected it and then disappeared. Riza watched with relief and horror as thousands among his lifelong enemy died. The Mage King had accidentally killed close to half his soldiers. They still outnumbered the refugees. However, Riza took great pleasure from the wail and cries of distress from the other hill. More than an hour passed, and the moon still appeared disinclined to move on. The men of the lines watched while the horde reorganized. Riza resisted sleep this time. The moons were just too bright. Finally, horns sounded, and the horde moved forward. Drums set the pace. At least this time, the Mage King's strategy had failed. He would need to win this battle without his tricks. And I'll stop there and let you finish the story on your own.
Okay. There we are, back together again.
Howdy.
Yeah, so we do have some questions out in the audience. Nice little twist there. That's what happens when you don't pay attention to nature. She always gets her bit in. So let me scroll back here for a second through some of these questions. Let's see. So we have this comment here that one aspect that I like is that the characters do not seem to know much about what is going on. And that was actually something that I had noticed too. And I was wondering, it made me wonder whether or not like the motivations of the mage army are a plot point that's kind of hidden and secret to be discovered in the reading.
It is, yeah. You do find out what's motivating him in as part of the climax of the story. Yeah, and there is, because there is there's a bigger story underneath that you get to find out about.
And then okay, so let's see, and
to just to follow up briefly, the main character doesn't really know what's going on either. He finds out at the same time everybody else does. He's just done with running, and that's why he stopped. That was pretty much it. He was like, okay, I'm done. They might as well kill me. I've been doing this for too long.
Yeah, sometimes you just come to the end. You know, you reach your done point. So this question here is actually they're kind of related to each other. So I'm going to ask like one followed by the other as kind of like a series. So does writing in a shared setting feel restrictive, or does it save time in world building so you can get to the story sooner?
I would say a little of both. It does feel restrictive, but restrictions aren't necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're a newer writer like I am. For me, it actually gave me a good foundation to jump off from. And that's the way I like thinking of it. I didn't have to, there were a lot of things I didn't have to introduce new readers to. When you read the book, you get everything you need to follow along, but you know, if you've read the other books as well, there isn't a whole lot of, the reader doesn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's happening. It's pretty straightforward. So I really enjoyed it. And so my first short story was in a shared universe as well. And I found the same thing. Writing in a shared universe can be very, how do I put it? It can feel a little restrictive. At the same time, if you really dive in and just enjoy yourself, you can really play around a lot with that and have some fun with it.
So then to kind of build on that a little bit, and I actually didn't notice the time. It is 2:58, and it's not as if I turn into a pumpkin at exactly 3 o'clock. But I do want to first say to anybody out there, if you're interested in having your name entered into the drawing for a free copy of They Call Me Princess, then please put your name into the comments right now, and then I will get that added onto the Wheel of Win. And when we're done with these questions, I'll spin the wheel and we'll have a winner. So name right now, that is it. And then circling back then to the second half of that shared world question, it is, how do you start writing in a shared setting, and do you need to be invited, or do you pitch ideas to somebody who approves that? What does that look like?
There are a couple of ways I've seen it happen. Generally, you don't invite yourself to write in someone else's universe unless there's an open call for stories. So you can find once in a while open calls for stories. The 4HU does open calls sometimes. The Fallen World might as well. If you are interested in writing in a shared world and you're not looking at an open call, then you can contact the author or publisher or whatever and ask. They're not going to be offended if you ask. And, the worst they can do is say no.
Right.
But the answer to every question you don't ask is no. So
yes, that is definitely true. I was wondering, because you're not the first author that we've ever had that has done that writes in shared settings. It seems to be kind of a popular thing to do. I'm curious if I can maybe build on that, like a third time.
Sure.
So when you're writing in a shared setting, is each author's, oops, that wasn't what I wanted, but is each author's work its own, like its own world in the multiverse kind of thing, like same setting, but over here, this is where the stories go and what's happening? Or do you all have to stay in one continuity?
Generally, it's not universally true, but most of the time, the original creator or creators want you to stay in the same continuity. They want canon. One of the in the anthology Tales from the Lion's Den, generally those stories are canon, sort of, but the whole idea is that the Lion's Den is a bar where people get together and they tell stories. So some of these stories may or may not be true. We were given a lot of freedom with that. So if the creators say, present the stories or whatever along those lines, then they're not necessarily, you have a little more freedom to play around with, and you can even fudge the rules a little bit. But that's up to the creators themselves.
Okay, and then one last question, and then we will do the drawing. So Get your names in the comments, you guys. And the last question is, what is the best place to learn the things that you need to know to get started as a writer? Hello? Uh-oh. You froze up on me. What? Well, heck. You're not coming back. I'm kind of thinking, since we've got a freeze here, that maybe I should go and do the book drawing. Oh, wait, here you are. Yes, now you're back. Yay. Okay.
Okay, to answer the question, the best place to start as a writer is to start writing. Honestly, you don't have to write 100 short stories to get started. Write a handful, then share it with some friends and see what they think about it. If you don't have any friends that are experienced writers, then approach an experienced writer and then get some feedback on that. And that's really the best place to start. Like I said, I went to college to learn how to write, among other things, and so I had that opportunity. I had plenty of opportunities to write and get feedback on my writing for a long time. So that's where I started. And you can't be afraid of feedback. That's probably the biggest thing I have to say to new writers. It doesn't matter how new you are. You do find someone you trust, and you don't have to find that person who will be absolutely honest with you. It's okay to find someone who's going to be supportive, even if your work isn't the best. But because they can tell you whether they like the story, even if the writing is weak, you might have a great story. You might have a terrible story and really good writing, and friends that love you and support you will help you find that balance.
That is a good way to look at because that's sometimes a difficult field to navigate. Is you want to help somebody out, but also they're your friend, so you don't want to criticize them, right? That's kind of a good way to look at taking feedback from people that
If anyone's interested, if you have friends that you want to give feedback to, you can just. I would recommend that if you want to give that feedback and you're not sure how to give negative feedback, always start with the positive. Just say, I like the story, or I like this character, I like this sentence. Even if there's only one sentence in the whole story, if you can highlight that sentence, start your feedback there and build trust with the writer.
Well, that is really good advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So those things always help. And this brings us here to the time of the drawing. So just so you guys know how this works, you put your name in the comments and I put your name onto the wheel of wind that I am about to share with you guys on the screen right now. there are two other possible entries that you can get. You can join our YouTube channel and get an entry by hitting the join button that should be right there on your screen if you're watching from YouTube. Or you can join our Patreon channel. I guess I should say or, because you can join both of them, and by doing so, get 2 extra votes. Any level on our Patreon will get you entered into every single drawing that we do. And the same thing with YouTube. So here we go. This is our wheel. Yay. And we are going to hit the spin button. Aha! Ragnar, congratulations. You are the winner of today's book prize. So that is pretty cool. We were just talking earlier. So in our Discord channel. So that's pretty cool. If you guys actually want to join us on Discord, you are also welcome to do that. The links for all those things are below. So is there anything that you would like to say to us before we let you go this afternoon?
Yeah, a couple of things.
Okay.
You can connect with me on Facebook, Jp Chandler. You can find my website at funfictionstories.com. You can also, I also have a locals channel. It's the same name, Fun Fiction Stories. So yeah, come along and say hi. Come over and join us.
Absolutely. And also the one thing I like to remind everybody to do, if you buy these books and read them, please leave a review wherever it is that you've bought them from. It really does help out the indie authors. So, and with that said, yeah, go ahead.
Just one last thing. They Call Me Princess is coming out in audiobook next week. You can find the link at the Amazon link, and it'll be there. Yeah, next week it'll be, and I really encourage people to do it, even if you've never listened to another audiobook in your life. Go listen to this one because it's awesome.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and with that said, we are on Friday, and our next show will be Wednesday. So I guess I will see all of you then. Please, Fairy Blossom Festival is coming up here at the end of this month. Check that out if you're interested. And then also we have one more hedge game as well before Fairy Blossom. So if you are interested in jumping in with the LARPy roleplay, then you can also just look in the little bar for the link to the hedge. That's our Discord server, and you can come join us at any time. We'd love to have you. Happy Friday, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Hit like and subscribe. Support us on Patreon if you can, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Fairy Princess.
Hello, friends. This is Gunther Hammerhands. Thank you for checking out Fairy Princess Lolly's channel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Use your troll hammer to ring that little bell icon to get notifications when she posts future videos. And if you'd like to support these magical creations, fly over to our Patreon and join the Fairy family.